Hey everybody, welcome back. It's another episode of Swedenborg and Life. Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to be looking at the purpose of spiritual struggles. And our topics are going to break down like this. Number 1, fever of the spirit. Number 2, the attack. 3, the defense. And 4, the purpose. So there's a particular phenomenon that Swedenborg describes, which is currently being translated as spiritual struggle or battle. It's probably the same phenomenon as the dark night of the soul described by a 16th century Spanish mystic, and today we might call it a crisis or a nervous breakdown or something. I don't know. It's not something we widely recognize in society, but to Swedenborg, these spiritual struggles are key episodes in our lives. They're actually essential on the path to happiness. You can't get there without going through them. And many of us may have already gone through them without fully realizing what they were. Stay tuned. All right, it's great to have everybody back with us another Monday night. This is a topic that I'm really excited to do, so I'm happy you guys are watching, and I'm really happy to have my guests here who I'll introduce in a minute, but first I have to introduce myself. My name is Curtis. I'm of no consequence, but I'm from the Swedenborg Foundation, which is a nonprofit that tries to get Swedenborg's ideas out, and we've got a cool idea of his. Today, my guests are Dr. Dan Synnestvedt and Dr. Soni Werner. Dan is a associate professor of philosophy, and Dr. Soni Werner is associate professor of psychology. Welcome back to the show, you guys.
Thank you for
having
us.
Really, really glad to have philosophy and psychology represented at the table here, because we're talking about something that happens in the mind, and so we should cover as many bases as possible here. Appreciate it. All right, so let's get into our first segment. Man. Okay, so I lose the bet. I was supposed to remember I never remember this little lower third questions. Questions, man. If you guys are watching this or even right now have something you want to say, write it out in the comment section. We'll get to it. We'll answer your questions live in the second half of the show. All right, now let's get to our first topic. I called this one Fever of the Spirit because this phenomenon we're talking about, spiritual struggle, it used to be translated temptations in the older translations of Swedenborg's work. The closest analog I can think of for it is a fever. It's kind of like that. So let's start by reading a few quotes about it, and then we'll start to unpack this whole thing. First one is from Secrets of Heaven 7:6-1. Spiritual struggle is a battle inside us between the evil spirits and angels present with us, and we sense this conflict indistinctly in our conscience. Further vital information about this combat is that angels constantly defend us and deflect the evil that the evil spirits intend against us. So hopefully you're already confused. So conscience, he talks about conscience, and I want to go to this second quote, which kind of explains conscience a little bit further, and then we'll get to chatting about it. Conscience is a new will and a new intellect received from the Lord. It is the Lord's presence in us, which is more immediate the more we respond to goodness or truth. If the Lord's presence is stronger than our response to goodness or truth, we come into trial. The reason for the trial is that the evil and falsity in us, which are moderated by the goodness and truth in us, cannot stand a more immediate presence, as circumstances in the other world can demonstrate. So you see in that second quote, Swedenborg is kind of talking about these kind of crises can be triggered when God actually approaches us. And the presence of God, the good stuff is like, good parts of us are like, yeah, and the bad parts are like, no. And so we kind of get that kind of kicks things off. Is that what you see, Dan?
Yeah, and it's interesting because we're already introduced a number of terms to try to talk about this phenomenon that we've experienced. So we've got trial, we've got struggle, we've got combat, we've got temptation, and if you go back to Latin and Greek roots, trial, you might picture in your mind some sort of prosecuting attorney or the evil spirits, and defense attorney or the angels,
like Serial, the podcast.
Right? Yeah, and then God as the judge. Actually, God is part of the defense attorney team. Right. Defending us is the way to picture that. But also think about trial in terms of say experiments. That we do in the sciences, psychology and natural sciences, where you're trying to prove something, or you're testing it to see what is its quality, what is it made out of, And you can also think about contest too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a combat. There's definitely that that fighting there, but it's also a kind of contest. Who will win? What will you decide? What will we decide to do or to be? And that to me puts a maybe a bit more of a positive tone to it than just I'm getting beat up by the bad guys.
Right. Yeah. So that putting that in context, it's a complex concept. It's sort of a compound concept. This thing that we're dealing with. And yet, when I first started reading Swedenborg, I would read the old translations where it was translated temptation, but it's not like temptation, like I can't have another donut. I should.
Right.
It is sort of this, and it's not a trial, as in we're on trial and God is pointing out sins. It's something. So I'm glad you bring that up, Soni. Do you have further thoughts on it?
One of the most important things I really want to emphasize is that Swedenborg says that the goodness comes from outside of us and evil comes from outside of us. And that can't be said often enough, because too often we generalize and say, he's an evil person or he's a good person. And I think it's really important in this discussion about conscience is that people get to feel right through themselves how much they're welcoming the goodness and evil, and that there's going to be conflict. But if I'm right here front and center, I get to choose. And the more I make an effort to choose, the more then, let's say I choose goodness, then it feels like it's mine. But there is that freedom to choose. And that is very different than the concept, let's say, of being born a bad seed or the black sheep of the family. Mm-hmm. Swedenborg doesn't say that.
Told you, Mom and Dad. Well, that's a great point. Because as we're saying, God is approaching, and kind of both sides are like, all right, we can't all coexist anymore. It's got to go one way or the other.
Somebody has to choose.
And that you really, that's a great point that Swedenborg talks a lot about, how where good is coming in and bad is coming in. And it's in these periods of crisis or struggle that for me, you really start to feel that, because you feel like, wow, I can't control my own mind, or I need help. So those kinds of things really feel vivid once this sort of thing starts to take place. And we could say a lot more, but let's say it in the context of our next subject, because I think this will probably lead us into the. Did you have a quick?
Well,
something?
just one more thing to add. I think from the realm of philosophy, the 18th century philosopher Immanuel Kant, who was influenced by Swedenborg, he brings up the subject of conscience and the idea of duty. Yes. And he too has fascinating description on a moral level about how there's a part of you that knows what your duty is, that you should be honest or that you should help people. But then there's another side of you that, is inclined to not be honest, to not tell the truth, or to just ignore other people and care only about yourself. And he says there is this conflict in us, and you feel this struggle, this anxiety, and it's when you manage to just do what you know is the right thing to do, just because it's the right thing to do, and not for any other reason, not because you think it's going to make you happy, or not because you're even naturally inclined to do it. Mm-hmm. You basically rise above the natural part, and you're just so committed to what your duty is that you do it no matter what.
Yeah, and to really make steps into a mindset shift like that, often you need something to disrupt your life, to get you going. And I called this first segment Fever of the Spirit, because fever is the heat that's uncomfortable in a fever is not actually the bad thing. It's actually a good thing, because it's cooking those microbes, and that's kind of what we're dealing with here, is that this stuff is coming up, but actually, this idea of the good and the bad are coming in. If you don't believe that, you're in sort of a falsity around that. But you experience this, and that kind of gets rid of your old way of, I'm the source of everything in my life. So these kinds of struggles. All right, let's move on. This is topic 2. Okay, so in this segment, we're going to try to set a record for the longest quote of all time.
And you have to do it without breathing in between,
I do not need to breathe. I do not need these human things. And for me, putting this show together, it was very, very hard to cut out. I wanted to have a lot more in here, because this is a complex topic. It's sort of one that we're sort of introducing, and there's so many good things he says about it. So I better stop wasting time. I better get to this. We're going to start by reading a very long quote. This is from Secrets of Heaven, 1820. So he's talking about evil spirits, the attack, and he goes into some detail here. Evil spirits never fight against anything but what we love. The more passionately we love something, the more bitterly they fight it. Evil demons combat anything good that touches our hearts. Evil spirits combat anything true that touches our hearts. As soon as they become aware of something we love, no matter how small, or smell out anything dear and pleasing to us, they immediately attack and try to destroy it. In the process, they are trying to destroy the whole person because our life consists in what we love. Nothing could possibly give them more pleasure than to destroy us. Nor do they ever stop trying, even if it takes forever, unless the Lord drives them away. The malicious, deceitful ones worm their way into our sensual loves, stroking them and so awakening us to them. Once they have done so, they immediately set out to destroy what we love, and consequently to kill us by 1,000 bewildering means. They do not fight by arguing against what is good and true. That kind of fight is useless, because if they were beaten 1,000 times, they would continue to stand firm, since there is no end to the supply of arguments undercutting goodness and truth. Instead, they pervert what is good and true, setting it aflame with the fire of appetite and delusion, so that for all we know, we share their appetites and delusions. They also seize on some unrelated pleasure in us and feed the flames with it. In this way, they very deviously infect and molest us. So skillfully do they work as they spread their contagion, that if the Lord did not help us, we would inevitably believe them.
All right.
Yeah, so there's a good one. And there's a bonus quote. It's tiny, don't worry, it's really small. I'm gonna read. There are two kinds of trial, one testing the intellect and the other the will. A struggle of the intellect is mild, and we perceive it only as the memory of such things, along with a kind of resulting anxiety. A struggle involving the urges of our will, on the other hand, is very severe, when we perceive it as an excruciating, burning pain inside. So, thanks for staying awake.
Good job.
Why I wanted to put those next to each other is you have Swedenborg describing, and this is if you're just watching this show for the first time, all these accounts of these spiritual, otherworldly, fantastical things. This is from Swedenborg's reported spiritual experiences. So for him, right. He was like people in near-death experiences. He was seeing this. He saw these battles. He was seeing all this. But in the second quote, he shows that even though this is what's going on, we feel it as thoughts and feelings.
Right.
And that's why I say in the beginning, you could have this kind of struggle and maybe not even understand what it was. And we were just talking about the story of Henry James Sr., right? Mm-hmm. How did that go?
Well, in the late 1800s, I think, mm-hmm. Henry James Sr., who was the father of Henry James Jr., who wrote a lot of great books and mm-hmm. novels and plays and things, and William James, who was the father of American psychology, my field. Anyway, he was over in England, and he was having a tough time. And he was discouraged and upset, and he didn't understand if he really loved goodness or whatever it was. And he went to England, and he went to what was considered sort of the, kind of like a spa, except back then it was you go to the waters and you sort of bubble in waters. And while he was there, he was talking to some people like, I'm so upset with life. And this very wise lady came up and said, I know what your problem is. Swedenborg would call that a temptation or a vastation. Mm-hmm. It's normal. It's actually very good for you because at the end, you'll figure out what you really love. Yeah. And he went, who's Swedenborg? And from then on, he was a Swedenborgian. He wrote books about Swedenborg. He taught his kids about it. And he has been fascinated by Swedenborg. And people who have followed what he had to say have been intrigued by that whole idea that actually it could be good for you, even if it's painful during the process.
Right. Yeah. And so he went and started reading up, and it matched his internal experience enough that he was like, "Ooh, this is something I might want to try." So, Dan, do you have further thoughts?
Well, yeah, I love the combination of the passages that you read because mm-hmm. the idea of infestation, those malicious microbes on a spiritual level,
right?
Mm-hmm. And then the burning pain that you feel inside when you are trying to figure out what is it that you really love, what is more important to you. Is it your neighbor and the people in your life and treating them the way you know that you should, or is it yourself?
Yes.
And you feel pulled in two directions, and when you're it's like having a muscle stretched in two directions, and that's a burning pain. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And on the plus side of it too, when we stretch our muscles, they can get stronger. Mm-hmm. That's the good side of it.
Yeah.
Another metaphor that Swedenborg talks about is think of a 3-story house. And we're mostly living in the middle level.
Right.
And that's where I'm thinking about when it was describing what we love. So think about how you decorate your house and you have these wonderful places to eat and entertain people and you just love your home. But there's an attic and there's a basement. And up in the attic is a metaphor for the Lord and the angels. So I almost picture these stairs coming down, and if we open the door to the attic, they can come in. But also coming up from the basement are almost like these infestations and, the snakes and and they're ruining your home.
In my basement. I like salamander.
So just think of these horrible, and they sneak in and they try to sneak in. It's almost like they have a camouflage, and so you're convinced that they should be there.
Yep.
But you have to really identify what they are, and the influence from the heavens or above us can really help us go, that is a love of self. That is just getting too attached to our worldly possessions. That's me wanting to be smarter than all my other friends and thinking I'm somehow superior. And we need to name those things, and then hopefully we'll get closer to goodness.
Right, because if there's not any kind of crisis, you never have to look at everything. You never have to bring it all up. And I want to point out that, it's this complex experience, the thing he's actually talking about. You mentioned, William James not knowing what he was going through, not understanding it. And in the beginning, Swedenborg talking in this number about hell attacks what you love. And it's just this confusing thing. And I had to leave out a million passages where he talks about you're brought to despair. And then that's when you first understand there's a higher power that I need help from. And this is not so that God is like, told you. No. This is because that recognition is an essential step towards the heavenly mindset. You'll never get there unless you really experience it. If you hear it like, oh yeah, I guess I need that stuff. But if you feel it, if you know like, wow, I can control things now, but I couldn't before. There's an outside sort of influence. All right, let's move on to the defense. Okay. We figure out, we've heard what we're up against, and so what's on our side? So, if you're confused so far, that's fine, and I don't think it's gonna resolve itself completely by the end. I would say we're providing an introduction to the topic. Like I said before, there's so much that I had to cut out from this, but hopefully some things will resonate with you guys at home, and it can pique your interest enough that you could go read more about it in what Swedenborg has to say and find more materials. But we're going to try to give you the major points. And so the defense is this next part. I want to read a quote here about it. This is from Secrets of Heaven. All who are undergoing spiritual trials are influenced by truth from the Lord, which rules and governs their thoughts. It lifts them up whenever they fall into doubt or even despair. This governing truth is the kind and type of truth that we have learned from the Word or from doctrine and confirmed to our own satisfaction. We do recall other kinds of truth as well at such times, but they do not exert control over our inner depths. Sometimes this controlling truth is invisible to our intellect, but it hovers secretly in the dark and governs us nonetheless. This is because the Lord's divine power flows into it, training the inner reaches of our mind on it. If it comes out into the open during our trials, then we take comfort from it and feel buoyed up. So that, to me, what that says is, you're in some kind of crisis. You don't even fully understand it. But okay, you have something that is that it means something to you, like something about higher power or about love or some kind of thing that you consider. This is a truth about life. And it's those things you kind of cling to when this is coming in, and through this experience is when you really, develop this sort of living relationship with him, right? Do you have expansions?
Well, yeah, I was thinking the trials or struggles of the intellect, and the trials or struggles of the will,
right? And
that you can get from one level to the next level, and it can happen pretty quickly. It's fascinating to me as a philosopher that we struggle with the intellect all the time. There are arguments, pro and con, and you can constantly go back and forth. There are good reasons to not tell the truth. Oh, but then there are good reasons to tell the truth. Then you can go, that can be a kind of struggle. But it's fascinating to me that he gets, another level beyond that, or, the next level down where we really live, which is, what do you really love? And who are you? What sort of person are you going to be? And and what kind of existence are you going to have? That, when you get down to that level, that's when I think you can experience this just mental confusion, where it's very difficult you sort of can't reason your way out of things anymore. You feel like the arguments are of equal weight on each side, and so you can't use your intellect to kind of make the decision. So then that forces you to go another level deeper, right, into your, okay, well now what do I love? And sometimes you can even feel like, I just want this to go away, which is hard. But it's great to know that there are, the defense is there, right? That there are angels helping you, there are other people helping you, and it's one of those times I think that makes you call on your inner resources, right? That it says, well, I remember important truths, when I was growing up, or lessons that we learned about. Well, honesty is the best policy, or something like that. Yeah. And it could sort of lead you to resilience, right?
Mm-hmm. I think it makes you stronger. I think also one way that we can feel the Lord's presence is, even if we have simple little truths, little statements, maybe quotes, like I like Psalm 23, where it talks about the Lord is right there with you, even through the valley of the shadow of death. And so even if somebody hasn't had a lot of religious training, they might have some simple truths maybe they got from a 12-step program, let go and let God. Yeah. Or take it easy, just really trying to keep things very simple, and then welcome the Lord's presence back in, welcome the positive influences back in, and the Lord is right there. It's not like he ever abandons us. He's always right there.
Yeah. Well, I think it can be, it's what, it's all about what's meaningful to you. That he's saying, right. The attack is against what's meaningful to you, right. And the defense are these things that to you are these higher truths, these kind of liberating things, and that you feel hope. You everything it feels bad, but you get hope from these concepts, and that's how you know, like, these are something. These are really helping. And I'm thinking of the sort of the kind of it's like when you forge metal, it goes through this heat, and that's how you get it stronger, and it's kind of coming through that process. And what process? Doesn't a process have a purpose? Stay tuned for our next segment. So, all right, so we've described what these spiritual struggles are. We know that, in them it's spiritual warfare. You're under attack. You feel it as psychological troubles of different kinds, and the feelings and the thoughts. The defense comes in the form of these sort of guiding principles that lead to this sense of hope. Whatever it is that you're able to grab onto, this sort of what's the light when everything is feeling dark, and that is actually, this is God moving closer to us, and that actually by the time it's done, something good's going to happen. So let's read a little bit about what that's going to be. Secrets of Heaven 857. A purpose of our trials then is to subdue our external qualities and make them obedient to inner qualities. Anyone can see this by considering that as soon as our interests are attacked and crushed, the way they are by misfortunes, sickness, mental illness, our cravings start to shut down. As they shut down, we start talking devoutly. Obedience in the outer self is simply a state in which cravings and consequent falsities do not obstruct, resist, or smother the desire for goodness and truth, an end to perverse longings and misguided thinking. And, you get sick or something like that, you suddenly start to think about what really matters. And that this is, he's talking about, that this is a way to sort of strip it down and figure out what really matters. And we have one more quick little quote to end it with. When we are fighting our spiritual battles, evil spirits are permitted to dredge up every vice and falsehood we possess and to use them as weapons. So this will be things in your mind that are false, and that your thoughts can kind of gain steam on those. When these spirits have been overcome, though, they are no longer allowed to do so, because they instantly sense in us a strength of commitment to what is good and true. And I think so. That's part of what it's doing, is it's fortifying us so that these kind of things can't have power over us anymore. I think about it as someone who has been an alcoholic, has gone through recovery, and now it's like you offer them a drink, you say, do you want to go to the bar? No, I'm not. And I'm getting close to that. And that Swedenborg is saying that actually, the spiritual world can sense that, and they won't even try if they know, okay, we can get nothing out of this person. It's not worth the resources. So do you guys have any thoughts on the purpose?
Yeah, coming from a psychology point of view, which is my field, I'm fascinated with research that says if you follow two groups of people, one group of people have won the lottery. And the false idea is that then we'll be happy all the time. But you follow those people for 3 years, they're almost always miserable. And they wish, 85% of them wish that they had never won. Because it was a falsity. And they go through this loneliness, they don't know whether they should work or not, and they're just detached. If you follow another group of people who have had a major crisis, like let's say a life-threatening illness, they didn't die but they were pretty close, or they lost their jobs, they lost their family, whatever it is, tremendous loss, and then you follow them for 3 years. Very often this group of people looks back and go, that was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because it brought out what really matters.
Yeah.
Relationships matter, having integrity matter, having my inner self and my outer actions have some continuity, and that is fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's the principle in action, and I think, all of us who haven't won the lottery, that idea that if we did, we would be happy is there, and it's very hard to get that out of your mind.
Yeah.
You think, okay, yeah, those people, but I would be smart about it. I would be fine. Those people, they know that's false. They've been there, and now they've except for that 13%, whatever they do. But you know what I mean? Like we experience it, we see, oh, this isn't what I thought it was, and you know it by living through it. Right. These other people, by living through something hard, start to understand good things, and that becomes a boon in their life. And only through, and that's kind of there's sort of like external examples of what we're talking about here. So, Dan, did you want to close up our conversation?
Yeah, I just think the older when I was younger, I really thought of struggles or temptations or trials as this burden that you have to slog your way through, and you just have to, like it says, get the natural part of yourself to obey the higher part, which is hard, and that sometimes you need a kind of crisis to just wake you up and stop you from living like a machine, just you're on automatic pilot. I think that's partly what that does. That won't permanently take care of everything that needs to be taken care of or healed or fixed, but it can be a wake-up call to then going in deeper and doing that. But the older I get, the more I'm gradually come around to this view that if you keep your eye on the purpose of it, you can see it as an opportunity. Yes, it's a painful opportunity. It's a bit like exercising when you really don't feel like exercising. But if you look at it as an opportunity to get stronger, to build that relationship, to really say, this is who I am. This is really what I want to be. This is going to be an identity for me, and it's actually an opportunity to say, no, that's those negative things, those bad things, that's actually not me. Those are flowing into me, and evil spirits, as you just read, they have all these sneaky ways of trying to get us to think that oh no, really you are that bad deep down inside. This is your opportunity to say, actually no, I'm not that bad deep down inside. I want to be a good person. I want to accept what's good flowing into me. This is my great chance to work with God and be that way and accept that and don't let all those negative things get brought up anymore.
Yeah, and it's about cementing principles. If you believe, you can sort of hear like, okay, there's God, maybe sort of, and okay, so everything comes from God, but if you get confirmed in that, then your negative thoughts and feelings don't have their same potential power, because think about it, the internal things that make us unhappy, worries about are we good enough, are we cool enough, are things gonna go well for us, all that stuff is, as you start to believe in providence and you start to believe in God and believe in love for the whole human race, those don't have any potency. Their potency goes down, and you start to build up this sort of immunity that he's talking about. And there's many more things that he says these experiences also kind of give us a spectrum of perception, that if you've experienced the bad, you more appreciate the good. There's a lot that goes on in there. If I was watching from home, I would have a lot of questions. So let's see if you guys really do, and we'll get to them in just a few seconds. Okay, now we're to the point where we've talked for a good long amount of time, and we want to hear you guys talk at least a little bit, and that'll get us started talking even more. But it's cool because we went over sort of some broad points of this thing, but I want to hear what are people wondering about, what's related to that. I hope we can flesh out the concept a little bit more. So let's get to our first one. This is from Ben on Facebook. What would Swedenborg do when he was faced with spiritual struggles? Do you guys, you want to say something? Go ahead.
Well,
it's a great question, Ben.
It is a very interesting question. And what evidence we have are that he knew that he was one of the smartest people on the planet at the time. And I think he struggled with the love of his own self-intelligence. Mm-hmm. And I think that was an issue. And what's interesting is that a friend of mine collected examples of his signature across his life and how he signed books. And at first they were very flamboyant. I am this. And you could almost see his ego just coming through, which is not uncommon when you have a smart person in the room. Yeah. And then as he got a little farther along, he got a little more modest. He realized he was not the source of all the wisdom in the world. And he got very, very much more, I'm a servant, and it's my job to share this information, and it's not about me. And I think that's very interesting that he struggled with that.
Yeah, well, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the other thing is he knew the Bible so well.
Yeah.
He studied it, he translated it, he made an index to it, that he had the ability to remember the relevant portions of sacred scripture that would really help undo the power of the assaults that were being made on him.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's those well-worn truths that that you can just apply to that situation. And he also knew from observation what all the techniques and tactics were that the evil spirits that were trying to do, and he could sense that they were out to kill him. They if you get a sense that people are really out to destroy your mind, you'll be sort of wiser and more on guard with that, and ready to spot in your own mind. Oh yeah, I know that. I know what that's trying to do there.
Right.
So, and now that I'm aware of that, I can take this countermeasure. I can distract myself, or I can do something good for somebody else and overcome that.
Yep.
Well, as it is in life, we get to know the various kinds of phone scams, email scams.
Yeah.
We know when people are approaching us in a certain way. So I was going to say the black dog. And if Ben, if you really want to know what Swedenborg did, his Journal of Dreams is translated and available. I think you can get it on Swedenborg.com, and that's basically his process of going through these. So he was writing his dreams out, interpreting his own dreams, and there was this black dog in his dreams that he was having all these struggles with, and he labeled that as his pride and his own intelligence. Yeah. But he also, I remember, it was either in there or his Journal of his Spiritual Experiences. Those are two separate things where he talks about, I had to cast all my cares on the Lord like a little child. And that for him, whenever he would try to fight from like, okay, I'm going to engage with this, when he was saying, help me, that was when he had strength. So those are a few things that he did. Yeah, he would definitely go to scripture, but the thrust of it was, the more that he was going or asking God for help, the more that he would get help. Yeah.
Just add one other quick thing. In a volume called The Philosopher's Notebook, he talks about all these quotations from famous philosophers and whatnot. But then at one point he stops and he says, what's really powerful is the kind of faith that you see in the Psalms, which is actually quite an emotional. I mean, that's poetry.
Yeah.
Oftentimes either written from the depths of despair,
yes,
or also the heights of joy and thanksgiving too.
Yeah.
And so I think that was something else for such a brilliant man.
Yes.
He also was able to really tap into quite profoundly emotional and affective side of himself and use that for good effect.
Yeah. Soni, did you have?
I would just concur with what he said. That was a great one.
Yeah.
Let's hear another question.
Okay. Here we go. Michelle Ann, YouTube. If God is so mighty and powerful, why can't he get rid of the evil spirits and Satan? And it's a great question, and I can see why, you'd ask it. And I'm thinking back to previous shows when we've dealt with sort of that. I remember I had Jonathan Rose on the show, and he talked about you got if you're trying to, if you're the sun, if God is the sun, and then you got the earth, and you're trying to help somebody on this side of the earth, you can't just come up, because you'll cook the whole earth. God can't just force people to change right now. The only reason that this kind of stuff is being allowed access to us is because of the good it can do. Like we were talking about, this kind of this is stirring up the bad tendencies in us, and when we rid ourselves of those, we gain immunity to these sorts of attacks. God is there and is protecting. He's not letting harm come to it. There might be suffering, but it's for a good end. And as we were discussing before, that if we know what the purpose of it is, it can feel really different. So God has that power, but will allow things if a better result comes out than if they hadn't happened. So that's my initial thoughts. Yes.
I would say the key word is freedom. He values us making choices about getting more goodness in our life or welcoming more truth. If we didn't have the contrast, like light and dark, evil and good, we would not know how to choose. And then we become just like robots. We'd just be like simple animals or beautiful plants, but we wouldn't be making a conscious choice, and that's what makes us human. And so, as you said, allow, he permits evil to be there, and so that we can see the contrast and make choices.
Yeah.
I would just add that sometimes when we think about God, we think about God's power as a kind of king who has omnipotent coercive power, which I think God does. But you can't. I don't think we should separate that from the love, mercy, and order, and wisdom that is God too. So it's not just one divine attribute apart from other divine attributes. I think you need to take all of them together. And when you put them all together, basically God loves people so much that he's not going to destroy even bad people in the spiritual world. Instead, he's going to actually integrate them into his orderly plan and actually, if you will, co-opt their evil tendencies to actually help bring about good things for people on this plane of existence.
Yeah, order. I'm glad you brought up order, because Swedenborg, in this concept of order, almost describes a limited God, in that God operates through order. And we read in one of those quotes that after these struggles are over and you have that truth, you believe that truth that has God's power in it. Then when these kinds of attacks come, they can't even get to. They just pull up in the car and they're like, oh, never mind. They pull back out of the driveway. But without that, there's not a mechanism with which God can defend us from that. And if we have these falsities or these evil tendencies in us that are causing all kinds of problems in our lives, it's like with a wound. If you don't open it up and clean it out, you're going to have a lot of trouble. So if we had these false concepts and evil tendencies in us, and God never let any trials come to us, those would never get brought out. They'd never be seen, acknowledged. Only if we see and acknowledge can we, or even things like believing that God is the source of life and that we need God's help. If that was never real to us, we could never get to these levels of true happiness and peace. And this comes through these sort of struggles. So those are a few of our thoughts on it. Great question. Let's take a look at another one. Drive by Poet, YouTube. Does Swedenborg go into detail about the purpose of particular struggles, like very painful diseases? He touches on disease. I mean, he in talking about these temptations or spiritual struggles, he will talk about sometimes the spiritual side of thing is accompanied by physical things, that physical things can do the same kind of thing. That if you're suffering physically, you naturally kind of think about the more important things of life. You see people who get really sick and they're like, well, I'm going to beat this, and they do all these amazing things. So there can be sort of that same element. It's not like every painful disease God is like, okay, I'm going to give you this.
Right.
It's more like you were saying, Dan, that we're all, and the both of you were saying, we're all in this. All human beings are in this together, and because we're all doing such intensely bad things a lot of the time, we harm each other because we're really doing this. It's not a game. So the diseases aren't necessarily God saying, okay, now you're going to have this. This is part of the whole human struggle, and unfortunately we're all casualties in certain ways. So those are my opening thoughts. Do you guys have any?
Yeah, I would say there's something called New Thought and Christian Science, and some of the people involved in those religious movements, new religious movements, were either acquainted with Swedenborg or acquainted with people who had read some Swedenborg. Mm-hmm. And there has been something of a tendency to sort of try and reverse diagnose yourself in a way, so that, if you get liver cancer and you get cancer of the eye and I get cancer of the brain, okay, well, so what does that mean spiritually?
Right.
You have some spiritual disease, you have a different spiritual disease, and I have a different disease. And I don't think Swedenborg says that.
No,
I don't think you can do that. Because he seems to say, well, the natural world has a certain amount of order and integrity, the way God sets it up, and good things start and they have their consequences, but bad things start and they have their consequences too. He doesn't say, well, if you've got this particular disease on the natural level, then that means you have a corresponding spiritual disease. There can be some link between them, but I don't think you can sort of diagnose your spirit by just looking at your body that way.
Right, or say like it's because it's your fault you have that cancer because you don't believe this, or there is sort of that out there.
Sometimes, and I think that can be one of the tricks of evil spirits too, to say, oh, well, see, you never did return the candy that you stole from that store, therefore you've got this disease, or you've got cavities.
We have ever since we're about 4 years old, we have a longing to figure out cause and effect, and we're sure that if we did this, then this will happen. And it's not quite that simple. I really think at a material level, we can't always say it feels fair. That somebody gets to have this fancy life, another person seems to always have all the bad breaks. At the external level, life isn't very fair. But at the spiritual level, the Lord's got us in this perfect balance. Now, for people who have a mental disease and temporarily their rational mind doesn't work, let's say they've been brain injured or they mentally re-challenged, if you really believe in an afterlife, which is part of the Swedenborgian view, those things are lifted in the next world. And if you didn't get a chance to finish sort of growing up intellectually and really use your freedom, you'll get to finish that in the next world. Mm-hmm. There's a time, it's almost like a college, that you get to finish learning and finish making choices that you weren't able to do here. So in the long eternal picture, it's fair.
Yeah, and that no evil is permitted unless good can come out of it.
Exactly.
So even somebody who has some kind of painful disease, there's not, it's not that it's being caused intentionally, but the only reason it's being allowed to persist is because something better is coming out of it. And everybody understands cause and effect in this world. Like I was learning about a long time ago about mountaintop mining. There was like in West Virginia, they were like doing all this mining where they'd blow off the top of the mountain and dig coal out of it, but they were dumping all these chemicals in there was like towns in the valleys, and their autism rates were going way up because there's all this mercury in that. So if and I can't know for sure if that was why, but let's say it is. Those people are suffering to a huge extent because this company got greedy up on top of the mountain. It's because of the presence of some kind of evil in the world. And that the same thing is the spiritual and physical world are linked. So the diseases are a result of evil in the spiritual world attacking people here. So that's the dynamic of it. So it's not just like God is like writing your life story and he's like, okay, now I'm gonna or like, so it's all part of a whole, but God is using it so that everything is helping everyone spiritually. So okay, that's a conversation we could have 12 shows in a row about. Let's get to another question. How can angels protect us as guardian angels? Simon, it's a good one. Good question. I say that about all questions, but I like them all. I'm not just saying that.
These are good questions.
Protection and spiritual struggle go hand in. Swedenborg writes that God and angels are actually closer to us in our struggles than they ever are in any other. And I think some of it is, when we talked about the defense, there was these truths, these things in the mind that kind of gave us hope and pushed this stuff back. And Swedenborg describes angels as being the ones who bring these truths to our mind that hold us strong in them. So there's this element of and also that he said in the very first thing we read that evil spirits attack, angels defend. There's a lot of levels on which we don't understand how that's working, but there are some where we just know that you're getting these negative attacks inside, but you're also getting comfort. And where's that comfort? That's angels. Like that's a direct drop of positivity in there. And the angels will even defend the negative things in us. Swedenborg says even the evil and falsity in us, angels will defend because they know it's not our fault we have it in the first place. So those are some initial thoughts.
I can think of 3 ways that guardian angels help us.
Yeah.
One way is I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but sometimes you'll be in a struggle and all of a sudden you'll remember something. Like something good that you did, or just some truth comes to you and you think, where did that idea come from? It didn't seem to come from yourself. Well, that's a guardian angel. Or I would say a second thing is sometimes you're in a struggle and then all of a sudden your feelings change. And I would say again that can be something that comes from an angel. And thirdly, I would say sometimes I've been in the midst of a struggle and contemplating actually giving in. I'm about to do something bad and I get interrupted.
Right.
And then afterwards, I just had this feeling like there was an angel. There was an angel that made someone knock on the door.
Yeah.
And okay, I have to answer the door now, or answer the phone.
Yeah. Yep. So I think we're talking about help, and it's all going back to thoughts and feelings and choice. And up or down there. So okay, those are great ones. Yep.
I think there's an interesting correspondence between how people can get out of psychological struggles and what we're talking about spiritually. For instance, it's a very good psychological technique when somebody's really full of anxiety for them to shift their focus to something beautiful in nature. To just look at a picture of a sunset or hold a baby, look at a puppy. I mean, it seems silly, but it actually shifts your focus. Another really important one is to imagine yourself in the future. It's a shift of focus, and I think that angels are right there next to you trying to imagine the best you could be in your future. And those are just some psychological techniques that people can use. And if you want to not talk about angels, then just think about them as cognitive behavior therapy techniques. But it's really very similar to saying, angels, would you help me think about what my life is going to be like in 5 years from now? Will I be able to see my grandchildren? Will I be able to watch my daughter graduate? And that shift of attention can actually, to me, is like inviting those angels to be right there with you. And
perspective, because perspective is the truth. When you're in these kinds of struggles, or it seems like there's no future, like it, but really, okay, 5 years from now, whatever it is, it will be fine, or it will pass, and that heaven has the truth, hell has falsity. So they're trying to convince you that they're trying to make you ignore the reality of things, and angels are trying to bring that reality. So thanks to both of you. Let's take a look at another one. This is from Mizukwasi on Facebook. Are we all going to live that life in the spiritual world after death, or is there some requirement? Everybody continues to exist in the life after death. You can have a more and more vivid, free, happy life the more you kind of follow good principles. Yeah.
I think this is a great note to end on, because one of the things that Swedenborg is very clear about is even though the struggles are a challenge and they're associated with despair and sometimes a feeling of hopelessness, he says after that's over, particularly if you're willing to recognize that you do a certain amount of work, but it's really God that's doing the heavy lifting in these combats. There's an experience of peace that, wow, I made the right decision, and things are going to be okay. Or that, I'm being tested on this again, and I actually feel a little stronger this time. It wasn't quite so bad this time. Well, that's actually a good sign, and you can start to feel, here's a blessing. Here's some happiness. And so that there's a joy, and Swedenborg says the little teeny tiny bit of joy you feel right now is nothing compared to what you're going to experience when you're conscious in the spiritual world.
That actually the things of the spirit are kind of obscure, but they become more tangible than our physical senses. Yeah.
And I think we know from people reported on their near-death experiences, and they come back and they tell us about them and they write about them. They get these incredible feelings of compassion and love, and that you are completely loved. It's like sitting on your mom's lap and completely feeling appreciated. It doesn't mean that we are the source of goodness, but we feel enveloped in it.
Yeah.
And I think we get tastes of that every once in a while. Even though I can't see the angels around me, every once in a while I try to pretend that I know what they look like, and know that I can just sort of include them as I'm trying to have my defenses to try to strengthen myself. But boy, in the next world, we're going to feel them around us all the time. They're pretty good therapists. That's what I'm thinking, these angels.
I would think that there'd be at least a few years ahead.
Yeah. We have a little more
These
time.
are so good. All right, let's just do one more,
Okay.
and then we'll cut it off for sure.
All right.
Rafe GB on YouTube. Personally, I suffer from an insidious disease. My belief is that God does not allow a burden that does not in the future lead to greater good. Sometimes this will only make sense in eternity. That's what I believe. Well, there, that's a great note to end.
That's a really good one.
So, and there you have it. There you have it from
agree.
some, often what about people that have disease or something? Go talk to those people. Thank you, Rafe or Rafe, for sharing that with us. And I often, I don't know, go talk to the people to what's happening, and they often have an insight on this is what life is like. So that's great. Thanks again for sharing that. Thanks to everybody who had comments and questions for today. All right, so if you guys want to help this show out, want to help it spread and help it persist, feel free to make a donation, small donation. Just open up the description in this video and just make a little PayPal. It will go a long way for us. We really appreciate it. And I really appreciate both of you coming on the show. It's been awesome having you, and hopefully you can come back again sometime soon.
Would love it.
Sure, yes. Thank you.
All right, everybody, we'll be back next Monday, and I'll see you then.